My day started with an amazing breakfast and a nice filter coffee. Yours must have started the same way, but yours must have been much more celebratory since today is Friday, the last day of the work week, right? But across the world, there have been people whose day did not start the right way. They are confused regarding their future and they don't even know if they will be alive tomorrow. Today, we are going to talk about the Russia Ukraine conflict and its effect on India. Early today morning, we have understood that Russia has launched a full scale invasion of Ukraine that opened with air and missile strikes on Ukrainian military facilities before troops and tanks rolled across the borders from the north, east, and south. So, this was a full fledged direct conflict or invasion of Ukraine launched by Russia because it did not just involve one area, but they tried to bombard it using all the different areas of Ukraine. Specifically, explosions were heard in Kiev, which is the capital of Ukraine, before dawn on Friday. In a televised address as the attack began, Russian President Vladimir Putin said it was needed to protect civilians in eastern Ukraine, where Ukrainian forces and Russia backed separatists have been fighting for almost 8 years. Protecting civilians using war can only be done by none other than Russian President Vladimir Putin. We are expecting many more fatalities which will happen with this war, but Mr. Putin thinks that is the only way to protect civilians in eastern Ukraine. The US had predicted Putin would falsely claim that the rebel held regions were under attack to justify any invasion in Ukraine, and that is what has happened currently. The Russian leader not only made this announcement that there would be a full fledged war on Ukraine, but to protect civilians, but he also mentioned that any other countries which would attempt to interfere in the Ukraine conflict would lead to consequences you have never seen in history. So, this was a direct threat to other countries who must feel overzealous to comment or try to protect Ukraine from whatever is currently happening. Putin also in the same statement accused US and its allies of ignoring Russia's demands to block Ukraine from joining NATO and after Moscow's security guarantees. Putin also said Russia does not intend to occupy Ukraine but plans to demilitarize. It is a euphemism which is used for destroying its armed forces. He urged Ukrainian servicemen to immediately put down arms and go home. Soon after his address, explosions were heard in the cities of Kiev, Kharkiv, and Odessa. The Ukrainian president earlier rejected Moscow's claims that his country poses a threat to Russia and made a passionate plea for peace. He vowed that Ukraine will defend itself and ordered a full military mobilization. Ukraine's army stands at 250,000 servicemen with 140,000 reservists. The US said Russia currently has nearly 2 lakh troops arrayed near Ukraine's borders before the invasion began. Zelensky, who is the Ukrainian president, says that he has information that he is the number one target for invading Russians, but he is determined to stay in Kiev no matter what happens. Ukraine. So, the conflict between Ukraine and Russia is not new. There has been a history between these two countries, and war has been a constant among both of those. We all have heard about this very interesting case study of Chernobyl nuclear site. So, Ukraine The Chernobyl nuclear site was in Ukraine, and Ukraine said it lost control of the Chernobyl nuclear site after Ukrainian forces waged a fierce battle with Russian troops. A nuclear reactor at the plant of 130 kilometers north of Kiev, which is the capital of Ukraine, exploded in April 1986, sending a radioactive cloud across Europe. The damaged reactor was later covered by a protective shell. There has been many documentaries regarding the Chernobyl nuclear site and what drastic event has happened over there. You could also check those documentaries out if you want to know more about what happened there. Now, if we come back to the history between Ukraine and Russia, there have been three parties in this history. Number one is, of course, Ukraine. Number two is Russia. And number three are the rebels. In April of 2014, Russia backed rebels seized government buildings in Donetsk and Luhansk regions, proclaiming the creation of People's Republics, and battled Ukrainian troops and volunteer battalions. So it was both Russia and Russia backed rebels who were participating in this war. The following month, the separatist regions held a popular vote to declare independence and make a bid to become part of Russia. Now, Russia always has been looking to control Ukraine, and that is one of the reasons that they have been backing these rebels who were actually in the Donetsk and Luhansk regions. As you can see from the map that I have attached here, these regions are very near to Russia. So Russia always is trying to protect its borders and also make sure that there are not too many democracy regimes around it, because Russia is not exactly democratic in that way, right? So that is why it takes any measures to make sure that the borders around its country are very stable and are controlled by Russia itself. So the new republics which have been created, which are Donetsk and Luhansk regions, wanted to become part of Russia. But Moscow has not accepted this motion. So as you can see, if Russia was really keen on helping Donetsk and Luhansk regions, they would have made them part of their country. But they really did not want to accept that motion and make them part of the country. They are just using these regions as a tool to keep Ukraine in check and prevent it from joining NATO. So if Ukraine joins NATO, then it becomes a powerful nation and it will also have support from other nations, which Russia does not want to happen. Amid ferocious battles involving tanks, heavy artillery, and warplanes, the Malaysia Airlines Flight 17 was shot down over eastern Ukraine on July 17, 2014, killing all the 298 people on board this flight. An international probe concluded that the passenger jet was downed by a Russia-supplied missile from the rebel-controlled territory in Ukraine. But Moscow still denies any involvement in this particular incident, which is a very sad incident. Now, France and Germany have always tried to broker a peace agreement between Ukraine and Russia, and that is what they did, which was signed in Minsk in February 2015. It is also very popularly called as the Minsk Peace Treaty between Ukraine and Russia. This was signed in February 2015 by representatives of Ukraine, Russia, and the rebels, all the three parties involved in the conflict. It envisaged a new ceasefire, a pullback of heavy weapons, and a series of moves towards a political settlement. A declaration backing the deal was signed by the leaders of Russia, Ukraine, France, and Germany. But the 2015 peace deal was a major diplomatic coup for the Kremlin, obliging Ukraine to grant special status to the separatist regions, that is Donetsk and Luhansk regions, allowing them to create their own police force and have a say in appointing local prosecutors and judges. It also envisaged that Ukraine could only regain control over the roughly 200-kilometer border with Russia in rebel regions after they get self-rule and hold OSCE monitored local elections. But many Ukrainians looked at this treaty, that is the Minsk Treaty, Peace Treaty of 2015, as a betrayal of national interests, and its implementation was not completed. With the Minsk deal stalled, Moscow's hope to use rebel regions to directly influence Ukraine's politics completely failed. But the frozen conflict has drained Kyiv's resources, that is the capital of Ukraine, effectively stymied its goal of joining NATO. Specifically, look at what is this conflict's effect on the world. Of course, the first entity to get affected for any conflict is the stock markets. Even in India, the stock markets plunged since yesterday, and the world stock markets have also plunged. And of course, oil prices have soared over concerns that heating bills and food prices would skyrocket. Beyond this, the conflict also looks to send prices spiraling even higher at gasoline pumps and grocery stores around the world. Apart from this, of course, the human fatality is a deep concern for all of us. Russia and Ukraine are also major producers of not only energy products like oil and gas, but also grains and various other commodities. Wars could upend global supplies, as could sanctions brought by the United States and other allies. Now, what are the Western countries doing about this specific conflict? Now, most of the times, the Western countries can only control any country using the trade, right? Because that is their secret weapon. And that is what the other Western countries have done at this point of time. They have started imposing different sanctions on the commodities that are coming from Russia, specifically regarding trade. In announcing a new round of sanctions on Thursday, Biden, who is the president of US, said US and its allies will block the assets of 4 large Russian banks, imposing export controls and, of course, sanctioning oligarchs. Now, if you specifically look at the different penalties that have been filed, the penalties fall in line with the White House's insistence that it would look to hit Russia's financial system and Putin's inner circle, because most of the Russian banks who have CEOs and they look like private independent organizations are all being controlled by either Putin directly or his inner circle. That is, he has a few people using which he controls everything that happens in Russia, and that is how he is being still the president, right? So if the different Western countries impose sanctions on Russian banks, then it will directly impact the trade or the money that controls any war effort. Apart from this, new US sanctions also targeted the military and financial institutions of Belarus, which Russia is using as a staging ground for its troops moving into Ukraine from the north. British Prime Minister Boris Johnson also said that he would aim to cut Russia off from the UK's financial market. The sanctions include freezing the assets of all major Russian banks, including the VTB Bank, its second biggest. Britain also plans to bar Russian companies and the Russian government from raising money on UK markets. Now, if we specifically look at one of the most important countries, when we are talking about Western countries, we definitely have to talk about this country, which generally responds very differently from what the market responds, which is, of course, our arch enemy, China. What is China's reaction to this specific conflict? Of course, China has not made any statements denouncing Russia from whatever steps they are currently taking. But rather than that, China has allowed new imports from Russia into its country at a time wherein other countries are banning imports from Russia. Of course, China is always different, right? They always react very differently to the market conditions depending on which side, depending on if they stay on which side, it becomes more profitable to them, right? So, China's customs agency on Thursday approved imports of wheat from all regions of Russia, a move that could help reduce the impact of possible Western sanctions. But previously, this is a very interesting case study because previously, this China has actually banned Russia's import specifically of wheat because Russia's wheat seems to have consisted of fungus and other contamination. So Russia actually put a ban on the wheat China put a ban on the wheat coming from Russia. But now, since Thursday, they have approved the wheat that is coming from Russia. And they said if any fungus or contamination will be found in the near future, then the ban will again resume. That is how China acts very differently from all of us. Now, specifically, this is all great. We have talked about the history between Ukraine and Russia. We have talked about what other Western countries are doing. What will be the effect of this conflict on world trade? But sitting in India, here we are majorly concerned about the effects of this conflict specifically on India. In India, specifically, there are two kinds of effect that might fall because of this conflict. Number one is, of course, the life. Life because there are more than 18,000 students studying medical or engineering in Ukraine. Indian students particularly look to pursue medical education in Ukraine because primarily the tuition fees of private medical colleges in India is much more expensive than what they can avail the same education for in Ukraine. Apart from that, the degree that is provided by the Ukraine institutions is recognized by most of the world's renowned medical companies or medical consortiums, including World Health Council. The Ukrainian medical degrees are also recognized by Indian Medical Council, Pakistan Medical Dental Council, and European Council of Medicine and General Medicine Council of the United Kingdom. So most of the European councils of medicine and of course World Health Council, including Indian Medical Council, approve of the degree that is provided by the Ukraine institutions, and that is why many of the medical students here in India pursue their education over there. Now, these 18,000 students are currently stranded in Ukraine, and India is trying to get them out of the country using any other means because, of course, the air travel is currently banned in Ukraine. Of course, the second effect that could fall on India because of this conflict is the trade impact. According to the UN Comtrade data, India was the 15th largest export and the second largest import market of pharmaceutical products for Ukraine. As for India, Ukraine is the 23rd largest export market and the 30th largest import for India in the same category, that is pharmaceuticals. Further, many Indian pharmaceutical companies, including Ranbaxy, Dr. Reddy's Laboratories, Sun Group, etc., have representative offices set up in Ukraine. They have also collectively set up the Indian Pharmaceutical Manufacturers Association in Ukraine country. India has a favorable trade balance with the Ukraine for pharmaceutical products. Generally, trade balance is calculated depending on how much export you are doing for the other country, how much imports you are getting from that other country, and of course, the other country also has a similar equation. How many exports they are doing to your country, how many imports they are getting from your country. So, depending on that, currently, the Ukraine exports for pharmaceutical products stands at 158.1 million and imports at $3.8 million in 2020. India's trade surplus stood at $154.3 million in the same category, which is pharmaceuticals. Ukraine, in terms of value, had a trade deficit of $232.7 million with respect to the bilateral trade of pharmaceutical products with India in 2020. Overall, India has a trade deficit of $1.7 billion with Ukraine in 2020. Of course, there are other exports that happen between India and Ukraine. India's major exports to Ukraine in 2020 were electrical and electronic equipment, plastics and related articles, oil, seeds, oligarch fruits, grain, fruits, seeds, and chemical products. India's major imports from Ukraine are, of course, animal, vegetable fats and oil, cleavage products totaling to $1.6 billion in terms of value in 2020, and fertilizers, which stood at $232.8 million. So, with all of this impacting us, of course, the stock market has plunged in India. We still don't know what is going to happen. Will the 18,000 students be safely extracted from Ukraine using whatever means currently Indian government is taking? Of course, other countries, including Ukraine's president, has urged our Indian Prime Minister Modi, to talk directly to Russia because there seems to be a good relationship between India and Russia. What do you think of this specific case study? Do you think Russia is seriously trying to pursue and capture Ukraine completely, or is it just a strategic move to make sure that the world is convinced that whatever Russia says actually does, thereby they don't try to manipulate Russia and stay clear of it? Whatever it is, whatever your thoughts are, please do put it in the comment section below and I would love to read more about it. This is Sirisha Verma, Founder Chief Strategist at Branding by Pixels, a business strategy, design and digital marketing company coming live to you from India. I've already covered 2 episodes in the playlist of work from home or side hustle business ideas that you could start incorporating today to make extra income on the side or as a full-fledged monthly income as well. Please do check that out. That would be a very interesting series. If you found my content interesting, please do subscribe to my channel and smash that like button. I'll see you again in my next video. Please do take care. Bye-bye.